Norm, let me ask you this question, because I want you to address one of the arguments I hear like most often on this issue, and we'll call it the Sam Harris and Bill Maher argument. The idea goes something like this: we're in a clash of civilizations, and Israel and Jews represent a more modern, enlightened philosophy, whereas Muslims represent a more draconian, primitive, unreformed religious ideology. And so in any sort of dispute between the enlightened ones and the ones who are in the dark ages, we're of course going to side with the enlightened ones because we're good secular liberals. The argument goes something like that. How do you respond to Bill Maher and Sam Harris and that argument?
Well, I want to just separate out two issues. That argument obviously is not going to fly into court, and nobody would.
Of course, yeah.
Nobody's there. There are Muslims sitting on the, the ICJ, so they're not going to make that kind of argument. And also, part of that argument, to the extent if it were made tomorrow, which I think it's unlikely, but part of the argument has already been anticipated. You can, by Vaughan Lowe, you can be in a war with anybody, but genocide is a peremptory norm. That means there are no extenuations. You cannot do it, full stop. So however horrendous the attack was on October 7th, it could never justify a genocide as a reaction. As to the question, leaving aside the legal issue and just sort of the general issue, when Sam Harris spoke on Piers Morgan, of course, he said that there's a prodigious number of suicide bombers, and this is something unthinkable, he called it, in any other situation, any other place in the world, any other religion, any other culture, and so forth. And it does get you, it does cause you to wonder, okay? And you, of course, are free to push back. Well, I have to be careful, yeah, because I have to do interviews. I have to be careful about the time. So what does a suicide bomber do? During the Second Intifada, began in September 2000, what was called the Second Civil Uprising in Israel. I always talk as if everybody knows, but it's already ancient history. I'm talking about a quarter century ago. So during the Second Intifada, members of Hamas strapped explosives on themselves, went on buses and blew up the buses, okay? So that's horrible. I'm not going to dispute that. And I was one of the few people within my political camp who wouldn't accept that. I was on record clearly. I wouldn't support that. But what does Israel do? So you ask yourself, Israel targets hospitals. Israel targets ambulances. Just yesterday, I mean, the country is so brazen, it's so out of control. It's so mad, it's so lunatic. It's like something out of a Kurosawa movie, that the day before the ICJ hearings are beginning, it targets an ambulance and kills 6 people. Any other country would exercise a little discretion on the eve of the ICJ hearings, charging them with genocide. But they're mad. They've been driven completely lunatic. In any case, if you compare the two acts, what is a hospital? A hospital houses the lame, the ill, the near dead, and the newly born. That's a hospital. And you're targeting it. If you read the Human Rights Watch report, which already came out probably more than a month ago, it says that Israel is systematically targeting, Israel is systematically targeting Gaza's hospitals. And it says, we have not seen, this is what they say, we have not seen any military justification. So along comes Bill Maher and Sam Harris, and they say this is a civilizational war between the enlightened and the enlightened and the backward, or as Netanyahu echoing Maher and Harris, or Harris and Maher echoing Netanyahu, it's a war between the sons of lightness and the sons of darkness, okay? So I ask the question, I'm not asking it rhetorically, I'm happy for your pushback. Who is the lightness and who is the darkness? You're targeting hospitals, and that's the lightness? Now, as a factual matter, people may not like me saying it. The fact of the matter is, at least the Hamas people show raw physical courage. They're willing to blow themselves up. What do the Israelis show? These are high-tech massacres. These are high-tech exercises in barbarism. Israel, in this particular operation, has crossed a negative threshold in barbarism. You cannot find in the modern world any country, as a matter of state policy, systematically targeting hospitals. It just isn't there. On every metric, Mr. Harris and Mr. Maher, on every metric that's been put forth, numbers of UN staff killed, no comparison between what Israel has done in Gaza and anywhere else in the world since the time it was first being recorded. Number of journalists killed, number of healthcare workers killed. On every metric, devastation. There wasn't as much devastation comparatively to the size of the population and the size of the terrain. Even when the US, even the Allied bombing of Dresden. So even if you go back to World War II, you can't find a comparison. And those are considered, as you know, dark chapters. The carpet bombing of the German cities, which is, carpet bombing is just a fancy term for terror bombing. The bombing of Dresden, those are considered dark chapters in our own history. Not that we haven't committed massive chapters. I'm just talking about this notion of enlightenment versus backwardness. So I, for one, can't see how suicide bombings are somehow emanations of a darkened soul, whereas systematic targeting of hospitals does not fall into that same category, but somehow is reflective of enlightenment. If you take the enlightened country, just compare it to the United States for a moment. And I don't sing the praises of the United States. I'm not a patriot in that sense. But you will remember during our own civil rights movement, during the demonstrations in places like, I guess it was Montgomery, the using of the fire hoses on the kids. And that outraged the public opinion in the United States. So Gaza had its own comparable attempt at nonviolent civil disobedience. It was called a Great March of Return. It began March 30th, 2018. What did Israel do? Look at the human rights reports. Israel targeted for death children, targeted for death journalists, targeted for death medical personnel, and targeted for death, go read the report, people with disabilities, people in wheelchairs were targeted. They were 300 meters away from the border with Israel. And they were just the snipers targeted for them for death, and then targeted the kneecap and below of the demonstrators in order to inflict on them what are called life-changing injuries, what we would call permanent injuries, permanently disabling them for life. Mm. Could that have happened in the United States during the Civil Rights Movement? No, it could not have happened. That was state policy. No. And then in the midst of all of this, yesterday, I have to watch that time because I'm going to have to edit this. You'll excuse me, but I have all these interviews scheduled on the ICJ hearings. The Save the Children, yesterday or 2 days ago, it came out with a report. Every day, as we speak today, 10 children in Gaza are going to get 1 or 2 amputations of their legs.
With no anesthesia.
And with no anesthesia. 10 children a day. Now, you know, when you see a kid in the street who has cerebral palsy or any other physical affliction, your heart leaps out to them. You try to do any kind of generous act to acknowledge their humanity, a wave of your hand, a smile, to give a validation to their life. Now you ask yourself a question. Truth be told, how often do you see kids with double amputations?
I don't know. Or never have.
Yeah. You heard what you just said?
Yeah.
Never had. Never have. And here, 10 children a day. And then these monsters, these moronic moral monsters, these Sam Harrises and these Bill Mahers and these Jordan Petersons and these Ben Shapiros come out and speak about the civilizational war against barbarism. It's so pitiful, so contemptible how these folks carry on. Fortunately, I think they're significantly in the minority right now, and that gives one some hope for humanity. There was one fellow, I won't name him, who continues to carry on in that vein of moral imbecility on his program, which is broadcast. And I notice that he gets fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer viewers. And I derive a certain gratification. I was thinking about that the other day. He follows through on his hateful logic, the hateful logic, to the point that he's sinking now in his own moral mucus.
Mm. All right, guys, if you like that clip, this is just a little piece of a longer interview with Norman Finkelstein. He's going to break down the entire International Court of Justice genocide hearing against Israel. So sign up below.